Hello, guys. My name is Spencer. I run the media for Radical Fencing. I'm joined here by Eli Schenkel of Team Radical of Team Canada. Eli, hello. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing well. I like to think I can't really complain at the moment, but yeah, things are a bit crazy these days. How are you, Spencer?
I'm not too bad. I'm holed up here in Chicago. Got a lot of food. Staying inside. Everyone should stay inside right now. What we figured we'd do is have a little bit of a video series where we interview some of the Team Radical members, sort of talk through about what's going on for them, sort of in the fencing world, in life, and just sort of show people what it's like to be in this position. Because it's a little bit of a weird time in history right now. Eli, you were pretty close to being effectively qualified for Canada for the 2020 Olympics, back when there was a 2020 Olympics. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I was in a comfortable lead over some teammates, so I was expected to qualify, pending what happened in the last competition, but that one it was postponed, the Anaheim competition. So who knows at this point?
And so when you learned that competition, the Anaheim Grand Prix, was first postponed, what were your first reactions, emotions? How was that feeling for you? Can you walk us through what that was like?
So it was actually, I guess, very mixed. One, because I knew what it meant to some teammates. Like there were several people on the team that I'm very close with who really needed that competition in order to fulfill their dreams of making the Olympics. I know that I was in sort of a weird spot because depending on how the federations, like the Canadian Federation or the FIE, choose to deal with qualification, it may or may not impact me that much, because if they weren't going to make a replacement competition, like if it was just flat out canceled and they kept their original qualification criteria, then there would be the relief that I would be locked in. However, it'd be unfortunate to see a few people who were training super hard for this final event to all of a sudden no longer have their chance. Like that was a bit crushing, but it also felt just really lame because I was feeling really, really good the days before the competition. I was really enjoying my fencing. There was like a little mini training camp of just free fencing that was being held at LAIFC. So I had a chance to compete against some of the best people in the world before the event, and I thought I was doing pretty well. So I was hyped, and it was just a bummer to find out that we weren't, like, all of the preparation wasn't going to happen, or wasn't going to result in an actual event.
Yeah, and talk to me a little bit too. I know, just taking a step back, like 2016 had been a really close call for you for Team Canada, and this was sort of a redemption year. And can you talk a little bit about the emotions leading up to this point? Like how had this season been going? How had everyone been feeling?
Okay. Well, it depends. I guess if you want to talk about like 2016, so actually that one was like really crushing just because I missed it on like technically two technicalities. One being that our team had finally caught up to Brazil in points on the very last team competition. Mm-hmm. But since we were only tied, they ended up going over us. And then individually, I missed it based on, I believe at the time they selected like top two from Pan Am's, and I was seeded second, but my teammate was seeded first, and since it's only one per nation, it skipped over me as the second spot to another country. So that one put me in like a very bad mental space for probably a year or two. And then this one started out with, like, the qualifying season started out on a pretty high note. I think my first two competitions weren't stellar, but my world champs result was uplifting. So I was feeling pretty good. The first competition of the season, I made second day, so it was my first time consecutively making second days. Mm-hmm. And then I just had like some rough patches, just like a few little hiccups.
And just touching there for a second, because you said, there had been a rough time after such a narrow miss on the Rio Olympics. How did you get your mental space back to somewhere where it was at the beginning of this season, where you did have that fantastic 32s at Worlds? If people haven't seen the last touch of that bout, it's fantastic. It's a classic Eli between the
Not gonna lie, the second touch of that match was the same one, only way cleaner. So watch that one instead.
All right.
But
So how did you get yourself back into that mental space where you're able to make 32s?
that one I would have to thank my brother a lot for that. It was like, to be honest, after 2016, like I think justifiably depressed for a bit because I had just missed my essentially lifelong dream on such a narrow margin that it was kind of like, what else could I do? So I was in like a really rough place. I was coaching at the time to make ends meet and working with a startup, and then due to, I think, my mental state, I ended up like leaving the startup. I ended up sort of questioning my livelihood as a coach, and then I was just really lost. So then when speaking with my brother, he said like, hey, you can always come back to school. I can get you a scholarship with the university he was at the time was the University of Durham out in the UK. And I said, sure, why not? So I left New York, went to the UK, and actually just that change of pace from, I would say really from moving from New York back to LA, like back to my original home right before I went to the UK, did wonders for me. Like just a different scene was really nice. And then when I was actually in the UK, even though the year itself might have been like there were a lot of like mixed experiences, just having like a new perspective on not just the world and like, because I'd never really lived out of the States before, was I think really helpful. It helped, I guess, like boost my confidence, not just in terms of the level at which I was competing out there. Like I won the British University Collegiate, basically the British NCAAs. So that was nice. It gave me a chance to really focus on how I was fencing, sort of through a lot of like self-coaching, and that I think gave me it made me like fall right back in love with fencing, just because I realized how much time I was spending in the fencing hall and training and working out and volunteering time to the fencing club out there. And I realized like, wait, why was I miserable? I was doing the exact same thing back in the States, except I was getting paid for it. Maybe this is like actually my calling. So that kind of helped me sort of like turn my life around, I would say.
And then
so when
you finished university, yeah. So what did you do?
So right after I went to work. I was actually expecting to be able to like go back to the States and start working right away, but due to, I guess, some just turns of events, the positions, like the coaching positions that I was expecting to be able to jump back into just were no longer available. So I had to sort of figure things out from there. And it ended up working out really well because I started working at a tech startup pre-accelerator called Startup Boost, where I was able to learn a lot. Like people always talk about, oh, like who's your coach and things like that, but I think it's people all around you can be your coaches. So my boss over there ended up giving me a lot of insight, even though it wasn't always like sports related. It ended up sort of carrying over into trying to think of things very, I guess, like analytically.
What's one piece of advice that he gave you that you think carried over well to your fencing?
One piece of advice. Well, with startups, a lot of it is basically matching the product with the customer. So I think part of that is realizing not just who is your, like from a coaching point of view, it's like who is your customer, it's what is your product. So is your product going to be like yelling at kids, or is it going to be, is your product like getting them to come to the same conclusions that you have with your own, like with the style that you're teaching? So I think after working with Startup Boost, I think it actually changed how I coach, especially because that company itself coaches startups. I think those types of lessons are able to translate over, and it helps you come up with a plan but not a very rigid one. Because you need to always be able to pivot, you need to be able to analyze, you need to be able to change anything on a dime. And I think that translates very well into fencing. You need to be able to understand your opponent. You need to like measure what level are they at, and not just that. You need to measure like what type of personality do they have, and sort of match, like modify your style surrounding that. So I think that startup environment like really helped hone that skill.
And then after the startup, you went to Canada, right? Or how was the next transition?
Yes. Well, actually, before I went to Canada, I was working briefly for a company, what's it called? I was working for Bridges Education Group, and I had some great experiences there. However, just due to the success at Worlds and the success at Pan Am's, and because Canada, we were able to do better than Brazil, so our outlook for 2020 was looking pretty solid. So then that's what caused me to leave LA and sort of like leave the new job to then focus more on athletics this year and training and coaching. And that brought me to Vancouver with Dynamo.
Awesome. So talk a little bit, I guess, about how this year has evolved. I know you've been training up at Dynamo in Vancouver with your brother. How was that transition? I mean, I think it's a little unintuitive for some people that you were doing so well in LA, you had the success, and you said, okay, the next step is going to be let me go to Canada and train with a different group of people. How come your success training in LA led you to make that decision?
I guess that's kind of just due to me being silly and some miscommunication, I guess. I was hoping to stay in LA for a while before the switch, but basically I wasn't really sure who the training partners were going to be sort of long term. And when I was in talks to go to Vancouver, I was under the understanding that some of my other like teammates and would be able to like visit and stay with us for stay in Vancouver as training partners. I think some of the economics of that might not have worked out, which is why it didn't happen all that much. But the actual process ended up being really nice, because just like in Durham, where I was training a lot with my brother in here in Vancouver, we were sort of forced to work together in a more stable and cohesive way. Now, a lot of people who have like seen us giving each other lessons would definitely say that we're like, pardon my language, but that we're full of shit, because we're just constantly arguing with each other. But this move has been more of a return to basics. It's been like a return to like analyzing why I hit the way I hit, why are some moves more effective than others. And
can you give perhaps like a really specific example of something you've worked on this year, or something you've changed in your way of fencing this year?
Okay, there are so many examples. Okay, one of them, like I was saying, return to basics. One of them is trying to sit lower on the back hip to keep a better balance. So instead of letting your body sort of lean forward, like while moving, like you see a lot of people, if this is their spine, it's kind of like this. So I'm trying to stay a little more upright, which will hopefully or theoretically give you a little bit more balance to move back and forth at the sacrifice for a little bit of reach. Another one is keeping the point on the target through the entirety of the bout. I could send you a clip of like an area where I think that was really, really useful. But yeah, I think part of the reason why I left LA and why I've had a lot of like, I guess, difficulties with coaching in the past, like how many years, probably like 6 years or so, was that not a lot of people, I think, really spoke the same language as far as coaching goes that I do. But having gone to the UK and explaining, or not just explaining things with my brother, but him having analyzed on his own time and saying like, hey, you're successful with this type of action because of this, or that type of action because of that, like it really helped create a school of thought, I like to think. So like we firmly believe that anything you do when you're fencing can and should be explained. It shouldn't just be like, oh, it was just a feeling, because everybody's like feeling is something explainable.
Awesome. And guys, I'll pause here for a moment to plug. If you guys haven't seen it, we share it on the Radical page all the time. Eli and his brother have a YouTube page where they've been uploading a lot of this stuff. Check it out. It'll be linked below wherever I'm posting this video. And check them out. Schenkel Bros on YouTube. Awesome content.
Actually, it switched. So we're at S class. We're S class now.
All right, S class.
Yeah, I think it's Schenkel Bros Presents, but I think the channel is now like S class fencing, and we actually have an educational app coming out soon. So I kind of used what I learned at Startup Boost to help make this tool, which has actually been like as awful as the COVID situation is. I actually think a lot of people are going to be much better at a technical level because of it, because they're forced to do all the footwork and all the target practice that they hate doing at the club. But I digress.
Well, no, but let's jump a little bit into the COVID situation. So when did this start sort of popping up on people's radar, on your radar, on the sports community radar? Like, can you walk us through the last couple of months how this has evolved from your perspective as a high level athlete who's sort of in their breakout season to make the Olympics?
I guess it got really real once Anaheim was canceled. But even before, it was honestly, I think it's some of that like sort of like cognitive dissonance of like, oh, you know what, that like, yeah, it's really bad, everybody should be like safe, but it's never going to happen to me type thing. It's just those people over there. So then when it started spreading, like I even remember thinking like, oh yeah, COVID is a thing, but we still got to travel to competition, still got to go. It's not like we can't just say, hey, I don't feel safe traveling. If you're trying to qualify for the Olympics, you basically have to go to every competition. So yeah, these last few were kind of spooky.
So that sounds like it was the mindset leading up to at what point before Anaheim, or was it literally when they canceled it? Because they canceled it pretty close to it.
I would say,
right? But like, when was it really
like 2 days before? It was, let's see. So I'm pretty sure everybody went to Cairo, and then basically once, like a few days before Anaheim, when people started saying like, yeah, it might get postponed, because they had already moved. Like I know they had already moved a competition in épée, or at least like in one of the women's épée World Cups or something. They moved it from, I believe, from China to Budapest, so it was already kind of real. Like, okay, this is impacting the sport. It's impacting people we know. I mean, there were people at the club, like sort of at the on the onset back in roughly December, who since Dynamo has quite a few Chinese families, we were hearing news about it very early on. There are some families who were sort of going so far as to quarantine themselves like very early on. And people would just be like, okay, yeah, that might be a bit excessive, but now that the whole world is quarantined, you're like, oh, you know what, maybe there was something to it. So hindsight is 2020. So we like we've known about it for a while, but really three or 4 days before the competition was where it really settled in, like, oh, okay, things are going to start growing at an exponential rate in places close to home. My parents, who work in the medical field, they said that they had actually called me a few days before the competition, like before I'd even flown to LA, to say, hey, like you and your girlfriend might want to like cancel the trip, because there have been cases reported here. There have been cases reported like in the hospitals, like in the area they work in. So they were getting kind of scared about that.
And so walk me through at that time, like what was your decision like to, because I know you ended up going to LA, right? Even despite those concerns. So what was that decision like? Because I think that was not, I know some people hadn't even made the trip out for the concerns, but you decided to go.
So I, like, since I haven't been home in LA for, I think, a bit more than 6 months now, I was excited to go back just to see them, see hopefully see friends, to train before the competition. So I wasn't really concerned with COVID at all at the time. I was just like, you know what, all I wanted was closure of the season being done. So like it was really the only thing on my mind. And then once we got there and once we saw like how many things were sort of shut down, how things were starting to sort of like wind down as people realized the severity and like the gravity of everything, did it really start to sink in, even at the point where like pretty much all of the plans that I had were canceled just because of COVID.
And but that was, so this was before I think the fencing clubs in the country closed, and there were still practices, right?
Yeah, this was still like the day or two before. I remember we trained. We probably trained a day or two after we shouldn't have. Like they were starting to
and you know,
say
the shouldn't have is in retrospect, right? But like what walk us through the mindset of like, what are you thinking in that moment that causes you to train in that situation? I think that might be something.
Well, in that moment, to be honest, it was probably a lot of ignorance. It was a lot of hubris and a lot of thinking, oh yeah, that it can happen to other people, but hey, we've been in the same room as all these athletes and they're all fine, so we can keep training here. It's totally fine. But I mean, that's the type of thinking that allows these things to spread to begin with. So we were still kind of like, keep in mind, it was going to be the competition. If the first day went well, I would have been locked in for Tokyo. So I was like really focused on that first day results. And when that first day never happened, it was like, okay, well, there's not going to be any competition for at least a month. And at that point we realized like it's probably going to be anywhere from like 2 to 3 to 6 to a year. Like it could be essentially there's no competition indefinitely until someone says otherwise. So we were thinking, okay, how do we enjoy our time in LA when nothing is open, when it's not really safe to go anywhere super public? And that resulted in like, well, I fence, my girlfriend fences, the person, like my teammate who was staying with me fences. So let's go to the club. Let's have another training session. And then we did. And then the following day we did not.
Yeah, it's kind of intense how things evolve now. Moving forward from that part, you went back to Canada, and there was
we got here like right before borders closed.
Right, and there is sort of a limbo period, and I know there was a moment. It was only about a day where this was true, where the Canadian Federation had pulled out of the Olympics before the Olympics had been postponed.
Yes.
Can you talk us through what hearing that was like? Sort of, because I think what people might not remember is like there was a huge push for the Olympics to go on anyway. As Eli mentioned, 2016 had been the closest of calls that you could possibly have for him. Missed it out there, was essentially qualified for this Olympics, and so then what's that like, getting the news that there might be an Olympics, but the Canadian Federation has decided you're not going, and no one's going from Canada? What was that like in that moment?
I think, to put it simply, it's the feeling that when you first hear the phrase "men plan, God laughs," which has just been coming to mind a lot recently. It's basically throughout the past two competitions, like immediately after we had qualified as a team for Canada, people all over, like people from all over the world and people back here in Canada have been congratulating me for qualifying, even though the last competition hadn't happened yet. So I wasn't locked in. And whenever people would say, hey, congrats, like, oh, Team Canada has qualified, I would say, like, you can't, no, like, please stop talking. It's not set in stone yet. Like, nobody knows what can happen. Now, at the time, I was thinking more in terms of, like, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Like, oh, you know what, maybe I'll have a terrible day. Maybe some teammates will have a stupendous day and pass me and push me out of qualification. What I wasn't really expecting was a global pandemic. But I mean, that's just another fencing lesson. It just teaches you to always expect the unexpected. And I've just found, I guess, a bit of humor in it, because like what can you do when everything is going right? and then all of a sudden it stops. Like there's nothing you can really do but just laugh. Like at this point, I think something that people might miss or might not realize is the amount of people who are Olympic level that are not Olympians, just due to either the qualification process in their country or maybe just like how good people in their country are. For example, what people might not realize when they think of Olympians is that if you are like the number 5 person in Italy, which is obviously one of the strongest countries in the sport in the world, like it doesn't matter if you're winning numerous World Cups or like medaling in like repeated world. You could medal in like every single World Cup, as long as you have people who are somehow performing better than you in your country, you won't be able to go to the Olympics. Mm-hmm. So like the Olympics, even though they're like this whole, like they're the grand event, they're like the biggest stage every niche sport athlete wants to make it to, they're not exactly an accurate reflection on the skill of the competitors. Obviously everybody or most everybody who's there is of like top quality, but there's still so many people who are of equal, if not better quality, that just simply won't be able to go. So that's kind of like the thoughts that have been running through my head. Like think of all the people who like are not going to get a chance to maybe redeem themselves and like you're, due to the whole postponement of Anaheim. It's going to be just a really weird Olympics, because you might see people who either are not at the top of their game because of like the time that they had to train in quarantine, which might have been different from their usual schedule, or the people who will get sick and not be able to train for that reason, the people who might just not even really have the heart to compete for another year, because at this point, like that's what it's looking like. Everybody's life during the Olympic season is essentially on hold. People redshirt from university, people stop working, people do all these things to sacrifice just for the shot at the Olympics. And then to say, hey, right at the end, like, oh, all that work you did, you need to do it again. Like it's, what can you do but laugh?
Yeah. So I mean, so there's that moment, right, where they pulled out, and then the whole Olympics got postponed. What was that, change like?
How
does that change your outlook?
I wasn't super worried, or like, I can't say that I was particularly affected during the first part where they said, oh, it's Canada won't send anyone, because like they did so with good reason. People should stay indoors. We should not be encouraging people to fly across the world to potentially spread this thing just for the sake of a game. But I didn't think that it would be that Canada wouldn't send a team. Like they had to postpone it. There's just
okay.
It doesn't matter how much you're thinking. It was either like, okay, they're either going to postpone it or it's canceled. Either way, you can't really worry. Like all of the announcements that have been coming out the past, let's say, month or so, since like the cancellation of the event, have basically been, I don't know, we don't know. It could get better a lot faster if people stay indoors. It could get worse if people ignore the quarantines. So yeah, it's a whole bunch of like, I don't know. So we can't really be affected by it. It's just, okay, we going to keep training as best we can, and that'll be that.
And let's talk about that. So what is the path forward right now? What have you been doing to train? What does the next month look like for you? What is the next day? What is the next couple of months? How are you feeling things out? What are you planning right now?
I am probably among the luckier people in quarantine, in that I have an amazing girlfriend that I've been staying with, who also fences. So we've been training probably not every day, but almost every day. And we've been able to do a lot more like technical training than I normally have time for, just given my normal work schedule. So since I'm typically like during regular hours, I'm a coach, and our club is closed, I've actually had a lot more time to focus on, I guess, like the mental side of fencing and think a lot about theory. think a lot about how can I explain this and how can I be a better coach by teaching students a different way. You'll see on the YouTube channel, there have been some drills that I've had to invent, which have, I think, really helped. They've helped me sort of break down the mechanics of certain hits. So we've been training more that way. Now, that being said, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the entire sport, or if a lot of, like, a good portion of the sport ends up sort of slightly dropping in level just due to a lack of cardio. Because one thing that people notice in fencing is that, like, even if you're a sprinter, or even if you're like any track and field athlete and you're great at, like, you have amazing cardio, fencing, since it's such a mental sport, like, it can be very draining in a different way. So unless if you're actually sparring often, that might be a tough workout to get in, even if you're doing, like, a bunch of hit, like 100 burpees, like, every day type thing. But like I said, I've been lucky enough to have a training partner, and my brother is also he's also moved in. The three of us are now together just in case there is, like, a mandatory lockdown, and he's been training me as well, and it's been actually been pretty nice to be able to focus on these types of sessions, to give each other lessons. And, like, I haven't really had consistent lessons since about 2013, I want to say, maybe 2012. So for me, it's not like a huge shift as far as, like, oh no, I'm not taking lessons anymore. It's more just like, great, I get to practice what I wanted to practice anyway.
Cool. Well, I think we're sort of nearing the end of this interview. Thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any sort of lasting pieces of advice for everyone else who's going through this? Thoughts, learnings, teachings, anything you want to share?
I mean, besides the obvious plug of check out the YouTube channel, it's think of now as a time where most people are going to be putting sport on the back burner. They're not really going to be focusing on fencing or training, because they'll say, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, I want to be better, but nobody else has any training partners, so I don't need to worry about this right now. Now should be a time where you're getting even better than you were before quarantine started becoming the norm. Now should be the time of doing footwork in your room alone. It should be hitting a target. It should be, like, focusing on the very specific delivery of the point. Like now is a time where, on your own, or with your phone or your laptop, and recording yourself, you can really understand, like, okay, how am I making the point hit the target? Am I, like, punching my hand forward? Am I delivering the tip? Am I hitting it at an angle that's going to prevent the tip from sliding off? Things like that. So it could be a time where the level of the sport either stagnates or jumps to the next level, because now you can have all these people who are essentially on an extended break. Now they can all do, like, real training sessions every single day.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Eli. Guys, thank you for listening, for watching. We're going to be doing more of these. I'm going to be sharing more content from other members of Team Radical. Let us know what you want to see more of. Stay safe, stay home, stay active, and a good rest of your day.
Stay radical.
Stay radical.